Welcome back to another book highlight. We have 2 left, believe it or not, before we reach the end of the book, and it is time to reveal the unthinkable. Joseph's brothers have finally arrived back in Egypt along with his full brother Benjamin, and Joseph is finally seeing what he's been praying to see, evidence that his brothers' hearts have changed and that they regret their sin against him. They're ready for reconciliation. On page 383 of the book of Sheaves and Stars, Joseph describes in his own words what's about to happen as he's thinking about revealing himself. And this is the basis for what we're going to talk about today with relation to Joseph's reunion, how it relates to us. So on page 383, he says to himself, "If this works, I will be reconciled to the brothers who betrayed me. At the very least, my father and Benjamin will discover what's been hidden from them for so long. Will they be able to forgive the others for all the years wasted in sorrow? But they haven't really been wasted. Elyon heard my boyhood cry for purpose and sent me here, circumventing every attempt to destroy my life, to save lives. This is what I have to help them understand. What they meant to harm me, our God used for good." And then over on 388, after he reveals himself, after the brothers make it clear that their hearts have changed when Joseph tests them, and Joseph reveals himself, he says to Judah, "I'll tell you everything, but you already see what God has done with it all. That's what I want fixed in your mind, no matter what you learn of my past." And he says this right before, they're starting to notice, wait a minute, you were a slave. Wait a minute, you went to prison. This happened to you, that happened to you. And that's what Joseph wants them to keep fixed in their mind, God's perspective about the whole thing. So from the story in the Bible what happened. Judah, the one who sold Joseph years ago, is now ready to lay down his life for Joseph's brother Benjamin for their father's sake, because Jacob desperately needs his youngest son to come home safely. And Joseph set this up. He's been praying for a clear sign that his brothers are ready to know who he is, and this is why. Joseph wasn't just on the other side of his suffering, enjoying a happily ever after and ready to throw that in his brothers' faces. He hadn't just survived. He was carrying a beautiful redemption that only God could have orchestrated, and that's what he was waiting to offer his brothers. The reality that what they intended for evil, God turned for good to save everyone from the famine and bring Egypt and Israel into the next stage of his great plan for them. That's what Joseph was stepping into all those years in slavery before he even knew it. And that's why everything was so heavy and the surrender he learned to walk in was so important. Because look at the impact God was planning. If Joseph had resisted God or barely scraped by and refused to forgive, refused to surrender, he never would have been able to offer his brothers this redemption that came from God. But now look at this. Joseph not only gets to tell his brothers, look at what God did with my life and my dreams, but he gets to tell them, look what he did for you, for us, to redeem and restore all of us as one family, the people Israel that he's bringing into Egypt for the next stage of his plan, which we'll talk about in the last video. Listen to Joseph describe what God was doing inside him all these years. And now this part is on 393 and 94. And this I added to the story, but I believe it agrees with the perspective Joseph shares in Scripture. So on page 393, Joseph is debriefing with his brothers, and they ask him, they said, "We were certain you wouldn't survive. What changed for you?" And he said, "I was so closed off inside. There was a permanence to the darkness that found me after Dothan. It infiltrated everything. I never thought I would be free of it. But El Shaddai kept revealing himself. I remember having the sense of being invited into something more. I didn't fully understand, but he just wanted me to believe that he was with me, that his presence would make all the difference. It was so simple, it almost made me angry." Judah whispers, "You just believed?" "It was difficult," Joseph continues, "especially when I didn't even know what to hope for. The depths of my faith back then never foresaw what Shaddai would do. Even my dreams didn't stretch this far. But the better I knew the dream giver, the more I saw that he deserved the deepest devotion even when I couldn't see ahead. So I leaned on him and I let him tell me the next step, which was usually to do the same thing I did the day before. My trust became greater worship than my lips could offer. I learned that nothing was a waste. The surrender of everything I was holding on to and the release of my life to bring him glory, it was all precious to him, part of something more important than I ever could have dreamed. That changed everything." And that's what Joseph got to give away, because he let God lead his heart to that point even before he knew that's where he was headed. And this is one reason why Joseph waited to reveal himself. He knew it would open a whole family wound all over again and necessitate the truth coming out to Jacob. But as it turned out, it wasn't just that the brothers got to tell Jacob, this is what we did. They got to tell Jacob, this is what God did. And that helped them through everything they had to process and figure out from that point on. Even when God brings you to a place of healing and breakthrough and redemption of broken things in your life, there are still going to be things you have to grapple with. There's going to be areas where you will be tempted to revisit all the old pain as you remember things that can't be reversed. But when you see where God has brought you and you've surrendered to his plan, you're a lot better able to face the truth and trust him with the painful logistics. This is why I had so much fun writing this part of the story, because I've spent so long imagining what it might have been like for Joseph to sort of debrief with his brothers what happened to him and how amazing and heavy it would have been. And this is Joseph's conclusion on page 396 as he's finishing this part of the debriefing with his brothers. He says, if I'd known what my dreams were going to cause, I might have kept quiet years ago. But then what? I would have stayed in Canaan, favored by my father, and hated by the brothers I wanted to lead, never learning to give God the glory for my gifts. And eventually the famine would have found all of us unprepared. Knowing that, how can I regret the path I traveled when every step was anointed by unprecedented grace? The outcome doesn't erase my pain or excuse my brother's sin, but our God has brought us all to a redemption even I was afraid to dream of. God directs our paths, and he's not finished. The depth of his character and the expanse of his purpose for our people is something we'll spend generations marveling over. For now, I can only thank him and make ready the refuge he sent me ahead to provide for Israel. It's not just that Joseph got freedom and God let his dreams come true and made him Lord over Egypt. He actually got to work with God and communicate his heart to his family. He got to be the instrument of God's reconciliation to the very people who sold him into slavery. Another family would have been torn apart by this because the flesh would have been too broken to even see any redemption, and flesh and spirit can't coexist. But when we submit our lives to God and trust him and his plan, even when we don't understand and all we can do is believe, he comes through like this and uses us in ways we never could have imagined. God doesn't want us to just get by or just get through. He's got plans that are so much bigger. Trust him to do the same for you. Wherever you are in the middle of your story, the middle of your journey, ask him for perspective. Ask him to help you believe and take just the next step, trusting that what you see is just the beginning, because it is.